As the Education Coordinator for LMA Headquarters, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Generational Marketing Strategies and Tactics for Engagement with Boomers, Gen Xers, and Millennials. This webinar is brought to you all today thanks to our LMA Southeast chapter. In just a second, I will share their homepage link with you all so that you can take a look on their upcoming events and all the resources they have to provide to you as an LMA member benefit. For today's call, we're very pleased to have two well-versed speakers. We have Jonathan Fitzgerald, Chief Marketing Officer, Greenberg Glusker, and Heather Morris, Director of Marketing at Barger & Wolin. And they do have a great session for us in store today. For any of you who are active on Twitter, as you can see on the screen, our speakers have provided their handles. And also you can tweet at LMAINTL. I'll send all that information to you in your chat so you can easily reference that. Some other announcements. When using the GoToWebinar tool, first off, you can minimize your webinar navigation and tuck that away by clicking on the top orange arrow button. That's optional to you. Second, there is a small icon with a symbol of a hand and a green arrow pointing upward. During the presentation, our speakers may ask you to raise your hand, and clicking on the arrow will allow you to do this. Third and final, please feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the event via the question and chat answer box on your webinar toolbar. Our speakers will take questions when possible during the presentation. We'll have some time at the end to get to any that we didn't get to during the presentation. You'll also have an opportunity to evaluate today's session once we close out. So please take a few moments to fill out our survey. This helps with the future programming of our events, and we thank you in advance. So now I want to turn the call over to our speakers, Jonathan and Heather. When you're ready, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you all for having us and asking us to come and participate with you. And Jonathan's queuing up a little video that we're going to kick off with, and we are on our way.
Hi, I'm a baby boomer.
And I'm Generation Y.
I like to show dedication to my employer by working really long hours.
I don't really feel like I need to work long hours as long as I get my work done.
I'm excited when my workday starts.
I'm excited when my workday ends.
I like to have meetings in person.
I prefer email or voicemail.
I've worked hard to climb the corporate ladder.
I should already be at the top of the ladder. I mean, I have a degree.
I put in 60 hours at the office last week.
I'm taking next month off to go hiking in Malaysia.
I have a sense of entitlement.
Oh, so do I.
Hey. I like Maxwell House.
Oh, I prefer Starbucks.
I just got a Facebook account.
Oh, Facebook. Good for you. That is so 2009.
I like competition.
I prefer collaboration.
I've heard of that.
Ah, and he doesn't know this, but I plan on getting his job when he retires.
She doesn't know this, but I'm never going to retire. Now, come on. We really need to work at getting along.
See, there you go with work again.
That's what I'm saying. You have no work ethic.
Well, that's because to you, working a half day means you leave at 5. You know what? You're right. We do need to try to get along.
That's what I think.
Okay, well, why don't we focus on what we admire about each other?
Great.
Think about it. Your generation invented a lot of the technology we use.
Yes, but for you, it just seems to come so easily.
Well, only because we're practically playing video games in our cribs.
Yes, that's true. You did have a different upbringing, though. My parents are still married to each other. Yes, self-esteem, we thought that was very important, so we tried to pump your generation full of it, which is why for everything you have a participation ribbon.
You know, we could use a little more of that here at work. I mean, does anybody ever say, hey, thanks for coming to work on time. Good job getting your work done. No, it's just like it's expected or something.
It is by those of us with a work ethic.
There you go again.
Hi, I'm a baby boomer.
And I'm Generation Y.
And we're Generation X, and we're stuck in the middle of all of this.
Well, hopefully you identified yourselves. I mean, Jonathan and I think the great thing is Jonathan and I are both Generation X. I'm at the beginning of it, and he's, in the middle. And, you know, one thing just to bring about where this program came from and what it's about is about a year and a half ago, Jonathan and I were at a CMO conference and saw a presentation on delivery mechanisms for the different generations. And as we started to think about how we could incorporate that presentation and those ideas into the legal environment that we work in, this is the presentation we came up with, which is talking a lot about our clients, but also talking about what's going on inside the law firms. For those who don't know me, you know, I'm Heather Morse. I've been in legal marketing since 1998, which seems forever long ago. I've worked at both Am Law 100 firms. I'm at a mid-sized firm right now based in Los Angeles and have been very active in LMA and LMA leadership since those early days. Jonathan?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I've also been in legal marketing for 13 years at 3 different firms, currently at Greenberg Lusker, and also been involved in LMA on the local and the national level. So we'll get moving on here with our presentation. I'm going to flash up a couple of photos on the screen, and I want you guys to use that little raise of hand icon that Tricia was talking about at the beginning of the call each time I pull up a photo. So here's the first one. If you recognize the individual and the role they're playing, go ahead and hit your hand button on the GoToWebinar screen.
I'm not seeing any hands coming up.
People must not recognize the photo. Okay, I'm moving on to the next one. Here we go. Anybody? Okay, here's the next one.
And
Oh, we got one there.
We got 10 hand raised on that third picture.
Okay, so here's the next one.
Seven.
And here's the final one. Hopefully we get just about everyone's hands on that last one.
So 11, that's about a third of the people you know, recognize this. For those who don't know, this is William Shatner, and a lot of us grew up watching him, you know, on many different shows and different environments. But the one thing that this exercise shows, and is to show all of you, is that we can all look at a similar object or similar person, and depending on our generation and our experience, we're going to look at him differently. Yeah, I really identify with William Shatner from the Star Trek days. My daughter loves him as the Priceline negotiator. So you can tell from just those two experiences where we are in the generational spectrum.
It also qualifies for how we as legal marketers look at situations from specific perspectives within our law firms. So we can have a group of 10 people in the same room, and based on our conditioning, we will each see the same situation from very different angles. And that doesn't mean that any one of our perspectives is right or wrong. It just means it's different. So as Heather and I go through this presentation today, we want to try to expand your mind, or at least your perspective, to drive home the fact that you will see things differently than your attorneys. They will see things differently from you, and both of you will probably think you're right. So we want you to know what the other person is viewing, what their perspective is, to give you more power of persuasion and the ability to move forward on whatever it is you're trying to get your firm and your attorneys to do. Heather?
So right now, we're looking at a generational timeline. Right now, there are 6 generations alive who are consumers, anywhere from, you know, prior to the silent generation, they're called the GI generation, and those are your grandparents, great-grandparents. But in the workplace, and the swipes who are, for a lot of us, our children. In between all of this, we have 4 generations for the very first time who are in the workplace together, interacting together, both as consumers and also as colleagues, bosses to employees. You know, it's just bringing about a lot of confusion in the workplace right now, especially as we're having the generational shift in leadership between the baby boomers and Generation X. We're seeing some tensions there. and we're going to go through that within the presentation. But one of the things that we want to really stress is that, by understanding the different generational markers, and those are the shared life experiences that we have during the formative years. They're called cohorts, the groups together. And those cohorts are the boomers, Gen X, millennials. And we share things in common through our upbringing, but it's not necessarily about the dates. So even though we have the dates here, and we can say Gen X, they were born in 1965 to 1982, there are people who are going to be in the baby boomer category who have Gen X thought process, and then vice versa as well. We're having a conversation before the call is, the experience with Gen X people who have baby boomer thought process. It can be very confusing. So hopefully we'll give you some tools to help you identify whether the person you're talking to has a Gen X mentality or a baby boomer mentality, and how we can negotiate and work around that.
And for purposes of our presentation today, we want to focus, although there are, a number of different generations that currently are alive and are currently in the workforce, today we really want to focus on Boomer and Gen X, because that's going to be most of our experience, and that's where each of us as legal marketers are really going to have a tremendous amount of ability to impact our practices and also the clients that we serve based on those markers. So we'll jump into the first one right now, which is what makes a boomer tick. The first characteristic is boomers seem to be very individualistic. How many of you, and again, you don't have to raise your hand or anything, but how many of you have experienced attorneys who perhaps are not willing to participate on a client team or don't want to approach a prospect with another one of their peer attorneys because of the fear of having to share origination, right? They would rather have 100% of no pie than share a percentage of a really big pie. And so that really translates for the boomers into a very much eat what you kill mentality, again, not client team focused and not interested in sharing origination, because in their mind, they have served their time, they have moved up the ranks, and they deserve 100% of it.
A lot of baby boomers, because of the way that they were raised, and these are the post-World War II, the children who grew up post-World War II, you know what, they lived for today. They didn't have to worry about tomorrow. The economy was booming in the United States, and and I know the call today, people are in the United States primarily, but just to let you know that each country has their own set of cohorts and what the boomers mean and all of that. Once again, it's about the shared experiences we had growing up. So for the boomers, growing up in this idealistic Americana, they didn't have to worry about tomorrow. So they just really focus in on today. And so you do have that short-term mentality, little to no planning. You see this a lot in those marketing plans that sit in a drawer. Why do they need a marketing plan? Those are, a whole year long. They just are focusing on today. And these are also the people who are planning the meeting in the car, on the way to the airport. They're the ones who are reading the file on the plane. Very little planning involved with baby boomers.
I can't help but laugh at some of the attorneys that I've worked for in the past who do have an annual business plan because the firm requires it, but have, like Heather said, keep it in a drawer somewhere, and 5 or 10 minutes before they go into their compensation meeting at the end of the year, they email me or they email one of my team members asking for a copy of their annual business development plan. And you're sitting there going, well, it's your plan. Shouldn't you be the owner of that document? And we as marketers would love to think that they've been looking at it and using it as a guidepost throughout the year, only to find out with the boomers specifically that it's just not part of their makeup. The third issue is entitlement. And this is that everybody gets a trophy type mentality in your law firms. If you've got a silent generation leadership team or a baby boomer leadership team, you'll notice that that team wants everybody in the firm more or less to be treated exactly the same. That's where the whole lockstep program in terms of seniority and compensation came into play, because it makes management very easy. everyone follows certain steps and certain milestones throughout their career to become the level of attorney that they are, and they're rewarded accordingly.
Well, I think one of the things that we're also seeing is that there's a lot of resentment right now between the service partners and the rainmakers because they both see themselves as having integral roles within the firm, and yet they're not valued the same. So it's an interesting dynamic there right now because part of that has to do with leadership and the type of personality they are as well. But as people have self-selected themselves, either as rainmakers or service partners, once again, we see a resentment there, and that kind of comes back to that sense of entitlement. The other thing, and it was just, oh, sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of entitlement, I recall a situation where I had a baby boomer who was really of the age that she should have probably been retired by now, but for various reasons, which we'll go into, she's still practicing. And there was an award opportunity that came up where we were going to submit her and one of her peers in her department for an industry award. And we both, marketing worked with both attorneys on their submission. Both attorneys knew that the other was going to be submitted. And when we finally got the results from the publication, the younger Gen Xer is the one that got listed over the baby boomer. And you would have thought that all hell rained loose on my firm at the time because this baby boomer was so mad that she did not get chosen as the senior statesman over her peer who was younger than her for this award, that there were all kinds of things that supposedly marketing did to sabotage her. She could just not get over the fact that, number one, she was deserving of the award, and number two, she had paid her dues and worked her way up to a point where it was her award to be had, not someone younger than her.
Once again, that comes down to the sense of entitlement is that they've earned their place just simply because of growing older, because of their seniority, as opposed to Gen X, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is a little bit more on the merit side. They feel that they've worked for it and earned it that way. One characteristic of boomers, and I know we're all seeing it, is that they're not retiring. And they're not retiring for many reasons. One of them is, you hear about they're not retiring because of the economy. Well, one of the reasons why is that because of living for today, they really didn't plan for retirement as well. They also, feel that, they just have to be here. They have no desire to stop working. And that's part of the characteristic of that generation. What we're seeing is that they're hoarding business that should be passed down to younger generations, and we'll talk about how that's looking on the client side in just a minute. Recently, at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, we had all the partner promotions in our firm, and one of our senior associates went to senior counsel. She didn't, not an of counsel position. She didn't jump to partner, and I talked to her about it. And she said, she chose not to because, she didn't really want to have to go out there and bring in the clients. Besides, when Partner X retires, Partner X said that she was going to hand her all of her current clients. And that has been part of the thinking. And even though this woman is a Gen Xer, she's actually a couple years younger than me, I was able to sit there and go, wait a minute, she has a baby boomer mentality. She has a mentality that she's entitled to the clients to be handed down to her, and she doesn't have to go out there and look for her own. And it's changed the way that I work with her directly. So I now approach her not as, as a Gen Xer, a little bit more aggressive in some of the other traits that they have, but more as a baby boomer, even though she is, younger than I am.
By the way, folks, by no means are we bashing any of the generations in this presentation. We're just trying to arm you with what the markers and what the characteristics are. You've probably seen many of them that we've talked about in your firms through your tenure, but please don't think that by mentioning some of these characteristics that may come off as a little negative, that we're taking sides with one generation or the other, or we're bashing one or the other. We're just trying to provide you with what Heather and I have experienced for the last 13-plus years in firms and trying to really understand the root of the behavior. So let's move on to Gen Xers.
real quick, Jonathan, and just want to give you a solution in here. With the senior associate, of counsel, one of the things that I've done is just really worked with her to get her on those client teams so she can get out there a little bit more and meet those clients and to be of service there and to show herself within the firm, because I don't want her hiding behind the closed doors. So, once again, by identifying where she is mentally and her generational mindset, I'm able to now work with her and shift her in better ways.
Okay,
so,
Gen Xers, what makes them tick? The first characteristic that Heather and I have recognized, and hopefully many of you have seen with your attorneys too, is this sense of independence. They're very entrepreneurial focused, and they're willing to do something themselves if their firm or their organization is not providing it to them.
Really where that comes from is that Generation X is really the markers that really identify the generation are divorce and being latchkey kids. So a lot of the kids of this generation really had to go out there, fend for themselves. They learned how to really depend on their friends, their colleagues, and we see that as they depend on their colleagues. So they're a lot more collaborative. They're very, as Jonathan said, entrepreneurial. They had to learn how to figure this out themselves, and they like to do things themselves as well. They're also, once again, we can go into, they're very self-reliant. This group of, attorneys, of individuals are not necessarily concerned with making partners. They really prefer candor and honesty and conversation. I will tell you, the differences between the Boomers and Gen X are very visible. You can see them if you're looking for them. Where the change and the shift from the GI generation, the silent generation to the baby boomers was not as visible as it is now. So you can definitely see these markers a lot more.
A perfect example of the self-reliant too is I have an associate who is literally up for making partner in December of this year at Greenberg. And this is someone who's definitely a rising star at the firm. He's already brought in probably $300,000 or $400,000, originated $300,000 or $400,000 a year of business. So literally, he's like the poster child for what a firm would want from their associates, particularly on the edge of making partner. 3 weeks ago, he gave notice because he wants to pursue a professorship at a local university. And literally, it took my firm by storm. Everyone is sitting around wringing their hands wondering why this associate would give up such an amazing future to go for a third of the money and a third of what my partners would perceive as the prestige to teach at a university. But if you understand the Gen X characteristic of self-reliant and not necessarily having the goal of making partner in lockstep all the way up, it totally makes sense why this guy decided to bail on the firm and pursue his own passions.
So, once again, and I think what Jonathan's really, identifying there as well is that there's a high tolerance for risk amongst Generation X. They're very ambitious. They're willing to try and do new and different things. I think you see a lot of, this is where there's more job hopping, where the Boomers, they started a job and they've stayed there forever, where the Generation X, they're going to jump around a lot more because they are willing to take that risk and get out there a little bit more than you would and try different things. Once again, if you can start to see the behaviors, then that lets you identify what those characteristics are and will help you identify really which generation the person you're dealing with is resting in and how you can motivate them differently. So really, when one thing that we're noticing within our firm as we're having the generational shift and Gen X thinkers and Gen X people are moving up, is it's really changing and shifting the culture of the firm, because this group of people, they're no longer willing to sit around and just wait for things to happen. They want to go out and make things happen. And I think that's one thing that when I'm putting together either client teams or management teams and I'm looking at implementing a new program, I'm looking for the tolerance for risk people. I'm looking for the characteristic and the behaviors that are going to center around that so I can move my projects forward, because without those people who are ambitious and willing to try different things, my new and different program isn't going to go anywhere. You know, I need that type of a leader to help me push things through in my firm.
The fourth.
And then,
yeah, go ahead, Heather.
I was going to say, this is the difficult part about us not being in the same room together. We've done this presentation a few times, but the handoffs are a little bit rougher, so my apologies on that. Gen X, they're peer focused. You know, these are your team players. These are the people who want to work together. They're collaborative. They're going to do the group pitches. They're going to share originations. I think you're going to be able to move them a lot further. But once again, you know, they're going to be working with boomers, and you need to be able to help mitigate the differences between those two teams and start to try and bring them together. You know, once again, I think, you know, being a Gen Xer and having the idea of what's going on between the different generations, you can be the person who brings about the peace between these two groups of people. So you've got collaborative people, and then you've got your senior partners who are really independent and don't like to collaborate. So one thing that I've done is I've gotten my collaborators together, and then we answer up, or then we take it to that senior partner. Not that we're keeping them not in the project at all, but that, you know, we have a lot of side meetings with my more collaborative people together to move the project forward once again.
A great example of this is a few years ago, we were very incessant here at Greenberg about everyone affecting the bottom line of the firm. And we believe that associates have the power to originate work and establish relationships just as much as partners do. And so we really encouraged everyone to do something during the year that would help the firm generate more revenue. And what was interesting is a group of 3 of my associates got together. One was from our real estate practice, one was from our corporate practice, and one was from our employment practice, but they were all friends. And they decided to do something as a group as opposed to an individual. And there is kind of an emerging business here in LA called Silicon Beach. It's the same as what's going on in Silicon Valley, it's just local to Los Angeles. And so this group of 3 associates determined that they wanted to spend their time with emerging tech and entertainment companies in Santa Monica, aiding those companies and counseling those companies at the very beginning stage in the hopes that these 3 associates would grow as counsel to these companies as the companies grew and got bigger. And the results have been absolutely amazing in terms of the kind of work that these 3 associates have been able to originate by focusing on this market. But it just goes to show, you know, the fact that these Gen Xers want to collaborate with one another. They don't want to do it by themselves, and they will seek out other people, whether it's in, you know, group pitches, client teams, pitching new business, whatever the case may be, in trying to accomplish their purpose. They want to include other people. It's just how they're hardwired.
Just quickly, there was a question about whether you'll have access to the slides, and just to let you know, they're actually posted on my blog right now, which is legalwatercoolerblog.com in the events, my events section. So the slides are up there, but I know that they'll also email them out to you as well, so you'll have access to all the slides. And then just one more quick thing about Generation X before we move forward. They're very merit-based, and that means that they earned it. These are, and you can see them in associates, as Jonathan said. At his firm, they're rewarding, you know, associates who are probably, you know, younger Gen X and some millennials as well with origination. And one of the difficult things, and this is a huge leadership push here, is that, you know, we can't, you know, with Generation X feels that they've earned it and they brought in the clients, they want to get paid for it. And this is a place where we see a lot of tension, and I have seen a lot of tension over the years. When I was at my last AmLaw 100 firm, we had an associate who was very involved in an association here. He was part of the gay community on one of the boards here in Los Angeles, which is very entertainment-based, and he was bringing in a lot of business and a lot of clients from the entertainment industry in his practice. Very young, in his early 30s. And he went in at year-end and he asked to be named partner and be given all the originations for his clients because, of course, the senior partner got all the originations for his work. And the firm told him no. He was too young. It wasn't time. It wasn't his time yet. He needed to wait. It's not fair to all the other kids in his class. And what he did is he literally the next day picked up his book of business, which at the time was about $1.5 million, and this is about 8 years and 9 years ago. $1.5 million book of business he picked up and walked literally across the courtyard to our competitive law firm, and has grown that business since then. And that's the one thing, is that Gen X, they earned it, they want it, they want to be recognized and rewarded for what they earned, and if you don't, they're going to walk. So,
earlier
on that happy note.
Yeah, on that. Earlier in our presentation, Heather mentioned that there exists some frustration between the boomers and the Gen Xers. And this slide, I think, will show you in terms of the AmLaw 100 managing partners where those leaders fit in terms of age. You can see that there are still some that are silent generation. There are a lot that are leading edge boomer, which is the older boomer, versus the trailing edge boomer, which is the younger boomer. And then almost none, I mean under 5 out of 100 Gen Xers in managing partner roles at AmLaw 100 firms. And again, as a result of some of these attorneys, these boomers not retiring, they're hanging around longer. And normally, in a normal cycle, Gen Xers would have already assumed these leadership positions, but for the fact that these boomers are hanging on. And so that's where some of this frustration between the generations, at least within our law firms, is coming from.
Well, and just to give you an idea, and this is a little bit historical, but and the reason why we broke out the leading edge boomers versus the trailing edge boomers, the leading edge boomers are 59 years old to 68 years old. Historically in law firms, the partnerships forced retirement anywhere between 60 and 65, but a lot of them had forced retirement at 60. They might have kept around, but they were, removed from the partnership, moved into an of-counsel, emeritus position, and those clients were passed down to that next generation. So we're seeing right now a lot of the trailing edge boomers. These are a lot of service partners who've been waiting for those leading edge boomers to retire and pass that work down, and it's not happening. Those leading edge boomers are hanging on, and we're also seeing frustration now because those trailing edge boomers who never did establish a book of business because they historically were raised in a law firm where every 10 years that book of business was passed down. It's not happening anymore. So, that's where a lot of that frustration is coming from as well. The difference is that that Generation X who are coming up, they're not inclined to wait. They're not sitting around waiting for those clients to come to them. They're out there making their own clients. And so we're seeing some interesting sandwiching of that trailing edge boomer in our law firms as well.
Okay. What this slide shows us is really the lawyer demographics among the American Lawyer 200 firms. And I think what you can see from this graph is the fact that there is a tidal wave of Gen Xers that, if they haven't already, they very soon will demand leadership or management roles within their law firms, or they're going to leave. And those of us that really care about that up-and-coming next generation and grooming them for leadership, if we understand the whole generation divide, we'll look for opportunities for those Gen Xers to serve. It could be in a practice development role. Some law firms, I know my firm specifically, at the beginning of this year, we just elected our managing partner who's 43 years old. Most of our practice group chairs have been transitioned from who you would think would be the most senior in the department to that next generation, some of it in hopes of retaining this up-and-coming talent who very shortly will be the primary breadwinners here at our firm.
Just to explain this chart a little bit more, I mean, these are when people got their law degrees. So we're looking at, in the 60s, that's the end of the seniors. The 70s and 80s, that's a lot. Those are your baby boomers. The 90s and the aughts, that's your Gen X. And then in the 10s and the, those right now in the teens, those are your millennials who are getting their law degrees right now. So you do have, when you start to look at the different charts together and you see that how many people, how many lawyers are out there in the AmLaw 200 who are Gen X versus how many of them are in leadership positions, we're seeing a big disbalance in there right now. And one of the things that will be interesting is to see in the next 10 years how many of those Gen Xers stay in the law firm. Because don't forget, Generation X, we've got 20 million fewer people in Generation X population-wise in the United States than we do baby boomers or millennials. It's that sandwich generation, but there are 20 million fewer Gen Xers than there are millennials or baby boomers.
All right. Practical example of this. There are law firms out there that were started by either really young silent generation members or baby boomers who have not started to make those transitions. And Heather and I are recognizing, we know of specific firms, and we're recognizing that because they haven't started to transition those leadership and management roles to younger attorneys, the firms are actually starting to fail. They're getting groups of attorneys that have, younger attorneys that recognize there's really no future for them at that firm, and they've started to split off. And where some of these firms once had 200 or 300 attorneys, the longer they go on with this silent generation and baby boomer leadership mentality, the more they're seeing exoduses from their firms. So really it's not only a luxury to understand this generation divide, it has real business practices as well, that if law firms and if particularly legal marketers don't understand what these markers and these behaviors are and can coach their leadership, their firms are going to start getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
And, and once again, it's just that we've got a disproportionate number of Gen Xers. And let's face it, Generation X, we're 49 years old. We're not young kids. And, how long are they going to be willing to be led in disproportionate numbers than the numbers that are within the law firm? I mean, they're really going to ask for and demand leadership roles. And we're starting to see that within the firms, but they're really going to start pushing it a lot more. I would say, since we put this presentation together, it was very interesting. A law firm here, it's not a law firm based in California, but they've replaced one of the Northern Pacific law firms, has replaced all their office managing partners specifically with Gen Xers. They got rid of all the baby boomer office managing partners. And I thought it was a great statement, and they made it very vocal and put out an article about it. So they weren't hiding it. They were making a concerted effort to start switching the generations within their firms, and that to me says that law firm is going to really succeed as the generational shift happens and takes place within their firm. So this, once again, starting to look back and starting to pull all these numbers together, one of the things we wanted to do is look at what's going on with our clients. How do our law firms, and really once again, we're basing this off, this one is off the AmLaw 100. I looked at the Fortune 100 and then the NASDAQ, which is also about 100 companies, and started to look at where we are in the generations between the two. And as you can see in the AmLaw 100, and these are the leaders, the managing partners, CEOs, as you can see in the first chart, that's the AmLaw 100. We see a lot of silent generation leaders. I mean, these people, these are seniors, are 69 years plus, and they're still, we've got 11, 12 of them who are still managing the AmLaw 100. A lot of boomers, very few Gen Xers. As you start moving through the chart and you look at the Fortune 100, you start to see that red line, that silent generation, go down. Those are still a lot of the founders of the companies. You start to see, as Jonathan's showing with his handy-dandy tool there, we're also seeing that the boomers, it's starting to become younger in the leadership roles, the people who are leading that. We also took a look at the general counsel, because those are who we're dealing with directly in a lot of cases. Once again, that silent generation is very small within the Fortune 100 GCs, and we're seeing a lot more Generation X, the green bar, go up. NASDAQ, which are a lot of the technology and communication companies, I thought it was really starting to tell when you look at these companies that they're really starting to push, and that Gen X looking up. These are the leaders within the NASDAQ 100. So if you're representing tech companies, any forward-thinking company, telecom, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at Gen X leadership is the predominant. So if we look from the ALMA 100 all the way to the NASDAQ, that green is just going straight up. I mean, there's just, I mean, I don't even know what more to say about this, except that our law firms are not reflecting our clients. And one of the things that became really clear to me when I saw this is I started asking different questions as we are putting pitch teams together and going out to meet with different clients. And we were going out to meet with a subsidiary of one of our largest clients to bring in the new business. We were going to meet with the new general counsel, and they're putting the team together. And I'm telling you, this team were all senior baby boomers. And I took one look at who the general counsel was. He's 42 years old. And I just stopped them, called them in their feet, and just said, you've got to stop. We have to bring, the age down. We need to bring the younger people in. We switched out a couple people on the pitch team. They went out, and I'm telling you, they brought in the business. But interestingly, all the new business that's coming in is going directly to the younger partner. So even though the team is successful, it's really that younger partner that we put on the team that's the one who brought the business in, because that general counsel wants to do business with someone who looks like him and reflects his generation. And these senior statesmen in our firm are not in anymore. And having that conversation with them is really tough. But you know what? It's like by giving them the facts, showing them who they're meeting with, giving them this information. I show them this chart. They're starting to get it and starting to put younger people on those pitch teams, whether they're senior partners, whether they're partners in charge, whether they're first seat partners. Diversity to us is also about age.
By the way, you'll notice that if you advise your attorneys and your pitch teams, just exactly what Heather mentioned, where the pitch team needs to take into account and needs to reflect the general counsel or the in-house counsel or the in-house management team of the prospect. For those of your attorneys that reject that notion, they will come back to the firm after the pitch meeting without acquiring the business. And you'll notice that they want to blame every single thing other than themselves as to why they didn't bring back the business. The brochure didn't have enough gloss on it. Marketing didn't prepare enough research materials for them going in. They'll give you every single reason under the sun when in fact it was as simple as the pitch team didn't reflect who they were pitching. Another recent example from Greenberg, we represented a billionaire. Our Trust and Estates group represented this billionaire for years and years and years. And he was divorced. He had one younger son who apparently was the heir to all of his fortune. And I find out one day that this billionaire has died, and according to his trust, all of his fortune goes to this son, who, by the way, was 21 years old. And so I just happened to be in the office of the originating attorney on this client, and the attorney said, hey, I'm going to pitch. By the way, this attorney was in his 70s. He said, by the way, I'm going to go pitch this 21-year-old because we want to retain the business. This client gives business to almost every single department within our firm, and it would be horrible if we lost him, as a result of this death. And I said to the attorney, who are you going to take with you for this pitch? And this attorney looked at me like deer in the headlights and said, well, why would I need to take anyone else? I'm the most senior statesman in this department. I'm internationally recognized on the topic. There's no one who knows more about it than me. I mean, there's no reason to take anyone else. And I said, think about who you're pitching, and think about what their needs and wants and desires are. And if I may make a suggestion, go find one of the younger associates in your department, and if for no other reason other than mentoring this young associate, take them with you to this meeting. Luckily, the attorney was bright enough to take my considerations and ended up taking a first-year associate. In the pitch meeting, the first-year associate and this now client totally hit it off. And they came back to the firm having retained this client's business. But it was because this first-year associate, who everyone knows nothing about the law or anything else for that matter. From a chemistry and an age perspective, a generation perspective, totally hit it off with this 21-year-old, and as a result, we brought back the business. And as Heather mentioned, it's this 21-year-old client is calling the associate. He's not calling the senior statesman for every single legal need that he has. And by the way, my firm is bright enough to be able to give this associate some of the origination on all the work that's coming in, to incentivize that associate to do more of that.
And to stay in the firm.
Well, there's that too.
Well, no, because, it's a true definition of, who's the originating attorney is who can walk out the door with the business. So, I think that's one thing, is that Jonathan's firm is very much savvily handling their generational shifts within their firm. We've talked a lot about what's going on with our clients, and I just want to take the shift and talk about what's going on inside our firms and companies. Jonathan, if you can hit over to the next slide.
Sure. Yep.
And one of the things, we came across this great study from Ernst & Young. This is a brand new study, so this data is actually very new. And, once again, they interviewed, 2,500 different people, different companies, it was 1,215 cross-company professionals, and asked them to start rating themselves and how they see themselves and different people within their firm, their companies. And, once again, and I don't think that this is, a surprise to anybody, but, baby boomers have that executive presence. But one of the things that was really interesting and, very much I think part of this conversation is that Generation X are seen as the revenue generators and the relationship builders. And that's really who's going out there bringing in the new business. And they're also adaptable. Boomers are not seen as being adaptable to anything, whether it's new technology, new processes. One of the things is I'm putting leadership teams together to bring out new projects. I really make sure that, who's leading the project is a Gen Xer. I need that type of leadership to start pushing through new ideas. Once again, social media is really seen as the millennials, what they really understand. And now I'm going to give out my warning to the Generation Xers who are on the panel. You cannot abdicate your social media and your technology savviness to the millennials. You need to be able to know and understand and speak this. Kevin O'Keefe posted a great article from Forbes about the top brand CMOs who are on Twitter and active on Twitter and social media. Kat Cole, who was a speaker at the LMA annual conference, we're all following her, and she's friending people on Facebook. We cannot abdicate that. That is where the brand people are moving. And once again, just like there's a generational shift right now between the Boomer and Gen X, at some point there's going to be a shift, and you are going to have technologically savvy managing partners, very social media savvy managing partners who are, in that marketplace, that social marketplace, and you have to be there. I think it really hit me as I posted an article on LinkedIn, Facebook, everywhere, and started having a conversation with the brand new managing partner who happens to be one of those 4 Gen Xers. He found me, and I'm having this great conversation with him, and I'm thinking this is really funny and interesting. And I looked up the CMO for this law firm, and while she, had a LinkedIn profile and a Twitter account, they were not active. They weren't built out. They weren't active. She did not have a presence. And I just was sitting there thinking, how sad. She has absolutely no idea that I'm having this high-level conversation with her managing partner because she's not active in social media. And so that is my big warning to you is you've got to know this. Don't abdicate it.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you can't have a younger member on your team who's responsible for it, but you as the baby boomer CMO need to understand the technology and the verbiage and everything else that goes along with it. Otherwise, you will find yourself irrelevant. You will find your firms replacing you with someone who does understand it. I think what I like the most about this slide is that it shows that we as marketers and we as law firms need to leverage talent for their best and highest use. So, yeah, we talk about the fact that we need to lead with Gen Xers. and all of their characteristics and behaviors, which are great, it doesn't mean we're putting the boomers out to pasture. It just means that their role within the firm and in front of clients changes. And if we as marketers and we as law firms can leverage our resources for the talent that they bring to the table, we will be more successful. There will be less generational divides. There will be less frustration because we get it. And it's almost something that happens subliminally, as long as we understand what the various markers and behaviors are.
Right. Well, and I think once again, looking at the chart with the entrepreneurial, nature of the Gen Xers, just to say that, really take advantage of them. They're ready to start leading. They're ready to go. They're ready to start leading. They're ready to start being, especially for the marketers, to be that. It's hard leading in a law firm, being a leader in a law firm in a marketing role or any type of administrative role. It's very hard to be the leader because, the lawyer's still on the firm and, they can just, you're not a partner. So it makes it very challenging. But the one thing is that I pair up with those entrepreneurial people within my firm, whether it's still, I've got some very entrepreneurial boomers, so I'll partner with them. I'll partner with the entrepreneurial, spirited Gen Xers, once again to help lead those projects because they're really going to make it a lot easier for me to get those through, and they're ready for it. They're ready for the challenge, whether they're, on the committee or not, bring them on, start to utilize them, and fire them up because they're waiting for it and they're ready to go.
Great. Okay, in terms of preferences, we've talked about, what the different markers, what the different behaviors, how each of them are hardwired, how the different generations are hardwired. Now we want to provide you with some preferences so you know what to do with all this information. For example, boomers will process information very different than Gen Xers. How many of you sent out an email soliciting information from your attorneys, and from a boomer, the response will be, please stop by my office, or please see me, versus a Gen Xer who will send you their response in an email, even if it is a page long, right? Both of them have different preferences when it comes to information. The boomers want the face-to-face time or the phone time if you're in different offices. They want structured meetings that are predictable because that's how they process information, versus the Gen Xers who are much more casual in networking and other meeting type situations. Things don't have to be super structured. They don't have to be super disciplined. It doesn't mean that they're less serious about the work. They just have different preferences as to how things are done.
One of the things with the purchasing influencers is that, for the boomers, they really like ratings and reviews. They love Yelp. They love Super Lawyers. They love Chambers. If I could, I joke about this, that we could retitle this presentation, Buy Them the Damn Plaque. You know what? I just buy them the plaque. They get the award, I'll buy them the plaque, whether it's the one that goes on their email or put it on their bio, they just love that because that's really part of their generational marker of getting that influencer, very much influenced by that, by reviews and by awards and accolades, whereas Generation X is not. They like the personal referrals, peer recommendations. It's just different in that regard. They're much more likely to trust what their friends have to say about, another attorney than they are, in regards to Chambers or anything else. So once again, I think that, we're seeing it as Martindale has been dying off. It's been very difficult. I think the only reason why Martindale has hung around as long as it has is because there's still seniors and boomers who are influenced by it, by the prestige of it, where Generation X, they just never bought into it. So they're not motivated that way in their purchasing.
Same goes for tailoring your message. If you're looking to move one group or the other, with boomers, you want to focus on testimonials and ways that whatever you're asking them to do accomplishes someone's vision or mission or hits one of their values, versus the Gen Xers who they don't mind having direct conversations. And those conversations don't necessarily need to be in person. They can be over multiple platforms. So understanding how each of them prefer to be motivated will help you decide which tool in your toolbox you use to go after each one of them. And part of those tools are the delivery devices that you use, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet or videos. I mean, my managing partner, as I mentioned, is 43 years old. I probably text him more than I see him, email him, or talk to him on the phone. And it's just because that's how he prefers to receive information on his handheld device. And we get all kinds of things done over text. And I know it seems informal, it seems kind of crazy. You've got a chief marketing officer who's getting work done with his managing partner through a text message. But if that's how it works best, why not utilize that tool?
So just real quickly, let's hop on to the last slide. I think it's well, we have 2 more slides, but let's get through it so we can end on time. Just how we reward, recognize, and engage with the different generations. I mean, the silent generation, they're really, it's about their seniority. They want to be respected for their seniority, and that's how they really feel rewarded and recognized. So once again, it's not playing into, but it's really working with them as the elder statesmen of the firm, the historical nature of what they know in the firm. Boomers, it's all about the experience, their level, their seniority. Give them opportunities to lead. You know, their rankings matter to them. Generation X, it's all about merit versus seniority. They earned it. Don't defer technology. Really work with it. Gen X, you know, they like to be flexible in scheduling. We're the sandwich generation with older parents, younger children, and they really emphasize results over process. So once again, it's about, you know, what the end product at the end of the day versus the process, where we see a lot of boomers are in process. And millennials, they really want to be recognized and rewarded for their contributions. So make sure that, you know, if they work on the article, their name's on the article. You know, if they're working on that blog post, put their name on that blog post. You know, they just want to be recognized for their contributions to the team effort.
Okay, in terms of conclusions and ways that Heather and I want to summarize this presentation for you to be as effective as possible, keep in mind, as we mentioned at the beginning, generations are not necessarily defined by age, but by behavior, by markers. So don't just automatically assume because someone is a baby boomer by age that that's also their mentality. Look for the behaviors and look for the markers to really drive the way that you tailor your actions to get them to move. Also, know your firm's attorneys really well and know the clients that they serve. I mean, as in-house marketers, our clients are our attorneys. But unfortunately, we've got double duty. We've got to worry about our own attorneys, and we've got to worry about the attorney's clients. And what generation are they? What are their behaviors? What motivates and moves them? And how can you play towards those strengths to get them to do what you want them to do?
I think, you know, multi-platform communication is key. You know, so for instance, when I'm writing something, not only do I put it in paper, it goes out on the blog post, it goes out in an email on client alerts. You know, we're not into video, but if we were, we would do a video on it. You know, you just have to have just the multi-platform communication because of the multi-generations, and everybody wants to receive the information the way they want to receive it. As a Generation Xer, I hate video because I don't have time for the buffering. I'm always on the go, and I'm on my cell phone. So you know what? I want to read it. You know, I want it concise and to read it. And then you've got others who, you know, are really happy to sit around and watch a long video. So it just really comes down to the preference of the client, the person who's receiving the information. And then finally, you know what? Prepare for the change because it's here. I'm seeing more and more conversation. ALA is having a lot of conversations about it. And I think it's just a great way to introduce a new concept to your attorneys as they're going out on client pitches, to start bringing them that information so that they really see what's going on out there.
Heather, I also believe that whether or not our firms or our organizations are willing to act on the change, I still think it's our role as in-house professionals to provide our management and leadership teams with the knowledge and with the information. The last thing we want is for one of them to come back and say, hey, I attended this conference. They talked about the generational shift, why haven't you, my in-house marketer, had anything to say or advised me on this? I think that would be worst case scenario for all of us.
So, once again, one thing that I think is just really easy to do is, that chart of where I did the top 100 clients, and I did it for the AmLaw 100 versus the NASDAQ and the Fortune 100. Do it with your clients. So take a chart, and this would be a key takeaway that you can do, and just chart out your firm's top 100 clients. Who's the partner in charge on the case? What generation are they in? Their CEO of the company, because that comes down to a lot of the leadership thought process, and the general counsel, not necessarily the attorneys that they're working with directly, but the general counsel. Once again, we're looking at the leadership here, not the people who are working on the files, and see how things are balancing out. Are you reflecting and are you looking like your clients? And that's a pretty powerful chart to put before your partners.
All right.
Okay.
We've put together some references and resources. All the different facts and figures that we referred to during our presentation today are included on this list. So if you go to Heather's blog, or if LMA International sends you this PowerPoint deck, you'll have those. And any final questions that we didn't cover?
And and also feel free to email us directly, follow us on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn, all of that, because once again, it's all about communication and building relationships. So feel free to contact either one of us at any time.
Thank you for your time today, folks. We really appreciate it.
And if I can echo all of that, thank you, Jonathan and Heather, so much for being here today. It was a great presentation. We knew from the start it would be. Just a reminder, if you can fill out a survey evaluating today's session, it'll be a small survey that pops up on your window when you exit the webinar. So with that, I wish everyone a great rest of the work week, and we hope to see you in future LMA programming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.